Hi, I'm Chris Little. I'm the news director at KFI AM 640 in Los Angeles, and this is part of our ongoing discussion with Providence St Joseph Health. We're talking about a myriad of things, and today we're talking with Tyler Norris. He's a doctor of divinity. He's also the chief executive of Wellbeing Trust at Providence St Joseph Health, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on in his realm of the world. Tyler, thanks for coming. Nice
Chris,
to see you.
a delight to be here with you.
Tell me about your job.
Well, I get to lead a national foundation focused on mental health and well-being. And our mission is to advance the mental, social, and spiritual health of the country. So we're not only focused on how we transform care and make sure people get the care they need to address their mental health and substance use issues, but we're really focused on the upstream issues and what are the internal capacities and the community conditions that give rise to well-being in the first place.
That sounds pretty heavy. Can you translate it for somebody like me? What does that mean?
Sure. Well, first of all, we're a foundation. So we make grants and we invest in care delivery, we invest in community, we invest in policy making, we invest in communications. In order to be able to have a measurable impact on the mental health and well-being of the country. As I'm sure we'll talk about, the numbers are headed the wrong way. Anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, completion of suicide, those rates are soaring. And so we're here to tackle those issues head on.
I think that's a great thing. And now that you mentioned it, why is all this stuff going on? I mean, especially suicide. We've heard about suicides, just a couple recently, Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain.
Absolutely.
It seems like they may have set off a suicide contagion, if that's possible.
Well, suicide contagion is real, and it's not only when celebrities do that, but particularly it can happen in high schools or colleges as well. But the rates of suicide have been soaring in the country, doubling over the past decade. There are many factors for that, but when we really pull it back, it has a lot to do with a sense of hopelessness and isolation, maybe disconnection from each other for many people, particularly individuals of color or low income, a sense of a lack of opportunity or a sense of meaning. But usually it's a combination of many of those things happening at the same time.
You know, it's fascinating to me. We're living longer, but we're killing ourselves more often. I mean, just to put it bluntly, it doesn't make sense. So where is this disconnect?
Right. Well, first of all, in terms of living longer, some of us are, particularly those that are more affluent, more well-being. We're living longer than ever. The last century showed a 25-year lifespan increase. But for communities of color, African Americans, Latinos, children are more likely to live 5 years less than their parents. So it really depends on who you are and where you are. Wow. And race and ethnicity plays a very, very significant issue right now. So we have some people doing better and some less. There's a split happening in the country.
Well, what do you attribute that to?
Economic opportunity, racism, and a whole array of factors that have people sense, first of all, can I express my sense of purpose or meaning in life? You know, for example, we've gotten to know each other over the last little bit and I've heard about your trajectory and you've asked me a bit about mine. Sense of purpose and opportunity and meaning, that tends to help us do better. When people don't feel that and aren't expressing their core purpose, we wobble a bit. And secondly, it has to do with belonging. Do I have people who care about me, places that I feel safe, a home environment that is not filled with trauma, etc., so that I can actually feel okay. When purpose and meaning aren't intact or a sense of belonging isn't intact, we go adrift. And that has a lot to do with this gap of who's doing better and who's not.
So what I hear you saying, it's all about balance.
It's a lot about balance. It's about our internal skills, which includes our ability to self-regulate when we feel anxious, when we feel depressed. Do we have healthy ways to deal with that? And I think reality, when we think about economic and cultural realities, is are the conditions in place in our communities for our potentiation? Are there pathways for us to do better? Meaning early childhood education, how are the schools and daycare settings? Do I have affordable, safe housing? Do I have access to that? Do I have mobility to get to work, get to school? Are there safe places for me to recreate, et cetera? So some of it's internal skills, and some of it has everything to do with the conditions in the community that support human flourishing.
I think a lot of us take it for granted that those conditions exist for me. I know they do.
Right.
But for some of these other communities you're talking about, disadvantaged communities, they don't.
They don't exist.
And we don't think about it.
Right, and it's a big part of, I think, what our nation is needing to face as we recognize that we are no longer a majority white country after 2040,
Right.
that who we are is increasingly black and brown, and until we understand that our well-being is bound up in each other, that we only do well when all of us do well, we're going to miss the opportunity of what health equity and equity of opportunity for everyone means. And until we really address that, we're going to see disparities in mental and physical health by race and ethnicity.
Well, what is it, or what was it that has caused Providence St Joseph Health and you in particular to focus on mental health and focus on this huge, overwhelming problem as it seems to be?
Well, Providence St Joseph Health has stepped up uniquely in the country to prioritize mental health and well-being as a core pillar of its mission. So its mission to provide high-quality, affordable care is well known. But the commitment when Providence Health Services and St. Joseph came together was to make mental health and well-being a centerpiece of transforming care and integrating care more fully, but to lead in the country by setting the pace for other health systems and philanthropies and policymakers to come along. So it's frankly a leadership commitment and a commitment of the sponsors and the sisters behind the health system to make mental health a full priority alongside physical health and to connect them in meaningful ways.
Well, let's back up a little bit
Yeah.
and tell us how Providence St Joseph Health came together.
Well, first of all, two leading Catholic health systems came together about 2 years ago, essentially covering the West, but also is a national leader because of quality improvement and telemedicine and the policy agenda that Providence has taken on. The combined organization of Providence St Joseph Health. So by making mental health and well-being a priority, it not only was a commitment to Providence's 110,000 caregivers, but a commitment to all of the communities it serves, but also by investing in well-being trust and endowing this new foundation, made a national commitment to say that we need to change the conversation about mental health in the country. We need to transform care, but we need to be investing in community and in policy in a way that other health systems, their philanthropies, policymakers, school superintendents, and others would join us with enough combined force and collaboration to really have a population-level impact.
What are some of the biggest issues then in mental health that you see?
Well, first of all, as we talked about, our increasing rates of anxiety and depression, substance
suicide.
misuse, and suicide. Those are at the top. One of the first things Wellbeing Trust did in its first year was to partner with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Trust for America's Health, and we released a report called Pain in the Nation. And it chronicled that over the past decade, over 1 million Americans died of these deaths of despair, alcohol, opioids, and other drugs, and suicide. And at current rates, projection is that those rates will double. And
Wow.
despite everything that we're doing and all the conversation, the trends are going exactly the wrong way. So as we take a look at what the sort of these, the hopelessness and isolation and sense of despair and disconnection that is plaguing so many of us, that causes us to act out in these
Right.
ways. We reach to substances, we reach to all kinds of things to sort of fill the gap. We're really trying to, number one, make sure that people have access to care when they need it in a crisis mode, that they have access to prevention upstream so that we can help build self-regulation skills and I know how to get support when I start to feel off or know how to show up for a friend, but also to really invest meaningfully in communities on what gives rise to well-being in the first place.
What is the reason that other healthcare companies don't focus on mental health? I mean, I know address
They
it, but
do,
they don't
right.
really focus it. It's almost
Yeah.
like an afterthought.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, you know, there are a handful that do, but many don't.
Yeah.
Probably most because it's difficult, complex work. And the outcomes
But isn't that
take
what it's all
time.
about?
It is absolutely what it comes all about, but that's leadership and mission.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of organizations are just saying, we don't know how to step up to that. And many of them aren't prepared to put themselves on the line for creating outcomes because they're not feeling the leadership commitment and the resource commitment enough to make it add up. It's very difficult to move the needle in a very short period of time. So this is a multi-year, almost a generational commitment. We talked a little bit earlier about being parents. You know, my kids are 23 and 25. It's a bit like raising a family. This is a generational commitment to have these kinds of outcomes, not a quick win where you sort of do a little something and think that it's somehow going to add up. Like, well, I read to my kid last night. Well, that's a good thing.
Right.
But this is an ongoing kind of commitment. And I think that's really where the leadership comes in that's so needed in the country.
So there's a big commitment from you
Yeah.
and Providence St Joseph Health on mental health.
Yes.
That's one of your pillars.
Yes.
What kind of an impact will you have?
Sure. Well, Wellbeing Trust, as an independent foundation and initially invested in by Providence St Joseph Health, has 5 focus areas that we'd like to have impact in. The first of them is transforming clinical care, which mostly means integrating mental and behavioral health. So that when we're talking to somebody about a physical health condition, much as we discussed a little bit earlier, as we're talking about their diabetes or their hypertension or a heart issue, we want to also say, how's your anxiety? How's your depression? How are you dealing with the stress at work or that might be created? So that we want to make sure we're caring for the whole person. That's
Right.
sort of number one. Secondly, has to do with investing in community and assuring the conditions for community, as I described a little bit before. Early childhood education, home visits when needed, good schools, preschools, access to transportation and housing, all those things that we know. Third, and very importantly from us, is a policy agenda to make sure that state and local and federal policy is making sure that people have parity, in other words, real access to mental health services and treatment and substance use treatment when they need it. We've been partnering significantly with a number of media outlets and partners and social media and other platforms to be able to open the conversation and normalize a conversation about anxiety and depression. And it's okay to talk about that.
Right.
If I can tell you about my knee that are hurting, I want to just as much tell you a little bit about where I might be struggling and kind of out ourselves on those conversations. And then finally, measurement. So we expect to be able to have outcomes in clinical transformation, community transformation, policy, changing the work in the country, and of course, creating data systems to track impact and know that it adds up.
I know you've done a lot of stuff in Northern California
Mhm.
with homeless people
Right.
and homeless veterans. How do you reach out to those people?
Well, first of all, we need to really focus on who we need to reach out to and do it in a meaningful way. So veterans have become a high priority for us, particularly those who are without housing, stable housing. One thing that we know is that stable housing is one of the most important things we can provide for somebody with ongoing mental health issues or substance misuse issues, because one, people just need a place to be able to be
Right.
and to relax, and you're always on edge when you're homeless. Secondly, that we know that
That's interesting. I didn't think of that. You're always on edge when you're homeless.
always
I
on
hadn't
edge.
thought of that.
Right. Driving home the other night in Oakland, where I live, pulled over and talked to a guy in the street, and that was our conversation at 1 o'clock in the morning, was how he is always on edge. And really my heart opened to him because I realized
Yeah.
there's never a place to really relax, whether it's a good place to sleep or his own safety or what have you. So that's really important. But also when you have stable housing, then it's easier to stay on your meds if that's
Right.
important, to have healthier meals, to have a little human interaction in a way that feels a little safer and more normal. And so we've been pioneering models in Northern California as well as in Oregon and Washington and Alaska that are really around case management and supporting the whole person, mental, emotional, physical, housing, nutrition, et cetera, so that we can really, and for veterans, people who've served our country, to not
Right.
address all parts of them is a travesty. And so that's important. And we are also doing the same thing with youth, because along with veterans' suicide rates, 20 veterans take their life a day. For teenagers, suicide has become the second leading cause of death, which is unacceptable.
How do you reach out to homeless veterans and to teenagers, or in general, people who need help but don't know they need help?
Yeah. One is that these issues of mental health and well-being are issues that we all face, first of all. It's actually all of us.
Yeah.
It's not just the 1 in 5 of us who may be diagnosed with one of these issues. It's part of all of our lives, our families' lives. Every one of us either struggle with these issues ourselves or the people most proximate. So we actually have a place in our heart and in our head that understands these issues. So the first is really opening with loving kindness and compassion and paying attention and listening. Not a question like, what's the matter with you? But rather, Chris, what matters to you?
Right.
And showing respect and dignity so that we meet somebody on the street or somebody who's struggling in a clinical setting or a young person who's just at wit's end, pressures at school or bullying or cutting or whatever they may be sort of facing or struggling with, is to listen with respect and dignity and allow somebody to find their voice. That's been so important about our Be Well, Be Heard, Be There campaigns. And part of that, Be Heard, is people find their voice. And with that, people start to tell you what matters to them. And then we can begin to respond to that. It might be hygiene, it might be housing, it might be just being heard.
How do you find them, though? I mean, how do they come to you? I mean, I can't go down to Skid Row and say, hey, have you heard of Providence St Joseph Health? They'll help you. Or I guess I could.
Right.
But how do you reach out?
Well, there's a lot that's actually happening. One, we're supporting community-based organizations across California that actually are out, that have people with lived experience, that understand the street, who are out and available to connect directly. We're training law enforcement and other safety net providers and other first responders to be able to more fully address mental health issues, whether that's in a law enforcement sort of first responder kind of.
That I understand. How do they get to you, Providence St Joseph Health?
Well, community-based organizations are a big part of that, and
they're the gateway.
They're the gateway that actually know, for one, we've been opening crisis stabilization units here in California and else that we have a place to go that is not jail. And that is not the emergency department. Most people don't need one of those settings and yet end up in either one of those, which of course are traumatic by their nature. Now, there's times where you need one or the other, but oftentimes people need a safe, quiet place to be, and these crisis stabilization units serve that, or more of an environment. Typically, whether it's on the street or a young person that's struggling in school, it could be a coach or a parent or a friend who's actually paying attention. And part of the skills that we're building in our partnerships right now is to be able to pay attention and recognize the signs of different behavior, or get into that, what those signs are, so that we learn how to show up for each other more fully and help somebody get care when they need it. So really it's about how all of us, whether it's at school or work or play or are contributing to community-based organizations, meet people where they are.
You talked about crisis stabilization.
Right.
I know you're doing that in Orange County.
Yes.
And I don't know if it's with the Anaheim School District or is it in Orange County in
There's
general?
a very large consortium in Orange County of multiple healthcare providers, insurance companies, community-based organizations, schools, places of worship that have come together in a consortia to address mental health across Orange County. And it includes crisis stabilization units. It includes navigators, patient navigators who help people kind of navigate the complexities of the system and get the care they need, or social services that they may need. It involves being in schools and helping young people build emotional self-regulation skills and sort of breathing and ways to calm and support ourselves, as well as how to show up for each other. Because in a way, our friendships, our peers, that's the first line. One of the things that we're most concerned about in the country is that 40% of Americans say that they don't have a best friend or a confidant.
Wow.
That's that kind of isolation or disconnect is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It is toxic to not have friendship and love in our lives. And so part of helping build friendships and those peer relationships is how we can show up for each other and pay attention and kind of read the signs and be there for each other.
One of the questions I have for you is to talk about the successes that you've had, and you've just spoken about some of the successes. Are there others?
Well, there's many successes, and we believe, and when we put out the Pain in the Nation report that sort of chronicled the deaths of despair and these terrible trends that are coming, we identified 60 evidence-based strategies kind of across a spectrum of what works, and that's what we're investing in. So it ties all the way from nurse family visits, so that when a young mom is pregnant, if she's struggling, to give her support in her house. Is the fridge full of healthy foods? Is there domestic violence or anything going on in the household? Or does she have the support she needs to give a healthy birth? We've seen tremendous success there. The whole early childhood and perinatal care, investing in good preschool, investing in elementary school so that those emotional self-regulation skills are in fact taught, to intervention in high school. So we're seeing interventions work all the way from pre-birth all the way to in the clinic, where we're actually addressing a whole person mentally and emotionally as well as physically. So whether it's on the sort of prevention end or the early identification and treatment end, or really going into a crisis, we're actually seeing things that work. And in fact, I think it's one of the most exciting parts of what we see in the country right now, that despite the sort of partisan rancor that I know is so difficult for many of us, the sort of toxic partisanship, there's a tremendous amount of agreement at the community level and the state level and even the federal level about what works. And that means that there's opportunities for all of us as leaders, not only to show up for our friends and kind of create environments in school and work that are safe and supportive, but actually to get involved in policies that we know pay off in the end.
Who is most at risk if you had to pick a group, or is there a group that's most at risk? Is it teens, or is it the addicted, or the homeless, or what?
Yes, yes, and yes. And at some level, we're all
what I
at
thought.
risk. Yes, yes, and yes. So as I mentioned, second leading cause of death is for teenagers, suicide. And of course, with more agency, beginning patterns of using substances when you feel a little anxious and depressed, that's a very, very important place to intervene, because patterns put in place for tweens and teens play out later.
Right.
We know we start to get fixes in that way, we're going to solve it. So that's really important. The LGBTQ community is very at risk. We know that that people who are facing isolation, not being welcomed, not being respected, not being heard, being judged for who and how they are showing up, are at much higher risk. And particularly as we celebrate Pride this month and all that, there's much we can be doing for those that are expressing their sexuality in ways that isn't always accepted across our country. And it's a very, very important place. And we talked about veterans. Also, men our own age, Chris, yes, are at risk. And the population of men in their late 40s up to almost 70, those rates of suicide are also soaring. So many of us that have kind of held it together for a long time are finding that our identities and ties to work and all that aren't enough, and we're needing to, middle-aged men
Yes.
are at risk of suicide in ways that are very important to look at.
And then that is why the multi-pronged
Amen.
approach.
All of us.
Yeah.
Right. One of the things I loved, I was talking with some friends with Australia the other day. In the United States, we talk about 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 people suffer with mental health, and you know somebody. In Australia, they're just saying, it's all of us.
That makes
It's
sense.
all of us. At home, at work, and we all know we're struggling. My father passed 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
It's been a tough few months for me, and I'm waking up more often in the morning not feeling as alive or as full or
Sure.
in the past. So I've been aware that my own emotional well-being is needing a little extra time. I'm needing more times with friends, more time in nature, more self-care than I have in the past. I just can't hit it like I can. And I know when I run my energy in the same way and don't care for myself, I don't do as well. So I'm paying attention myself to my own well-being, and it gives me a heck of a lot more compassion for people who struggle with their anxiety and depression every day.
Wow, it's fascinating. You're very passionate. How are you reaching out to people? I know we're using social media here.
Yeah.
Entertainment, social media. What other methods are you using to let people know about your mission and your message?
So one of the ways we're reaching out is in a partnership with iHeartMedia. And we've partnered up around hashtags Be Well, Be Heard, and Be There. And by training DJs and playing music and talking at drive time with DJs, with celebrities and others talking about their anxiety and depression is making the rest of us sort of feel like, gosh, if those folks are talking about it that I'm paying attention to, sports figures, music and others, maybe it's safe for me to talk about it that way. Or we're talking at drive time when moms and kids or dads and kids are in the car going together to sort of open that conversation. So that's one of the things we've done with radio, for example.
Right.
With video clips and social media, one of the things we're thinking about is how in social media, in our social platforms, when someone is expressing suicidal ideation or anxiety and depression, we don't have to point somebody to a website. Right there in that social platform, helping people sort of track right now by literally the social exhaust, as it's called, right now by feeding proactively positive messages or where you might go to health into their social streams is very important. But we're using film. We're using concerts.
Now, using film and how and what?
In fact, we're in the process of developing a film strategy right now that will use film and documentary to tell stories of people who are struggling and how they're finding their way back to increased health and well-being through practices, to tell a story that actually you can get help, it is possible to do better, that there is a tremendous amount of hope, and what you might need to do to hang in there.
I want to go back to this question because as a reporter, I've seen, so many destitute people, and I'm wondering though, if like somebody's watching us right now, if they needed to reach out, who would they reach out to?
Right. Well, first of all, the crisis text line is a tremendous place to begin, or the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Those numbers are places to begin. There's somebody that will receive that text, that will take that phone call right now. So there is always a crisis line. The other thing to do is to pick up the phone or go across the hall or cross the living room or the kitchen table or reach out to somebody at work or school or at place of worship or in the park and find a safe person to talk with about what you're struggling with. Find somebody who will listen. Ask somebody just to listen to you for a minute. We tend to want to help each other so much, we interrupt and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Just say, could you listen to me for a minute? I got to get something off my chest. I'm struggling. And ask somebody to support. Or if you're on the other side of the equation and someone's coming, listen.
Right.
Shh. Let them find their voice. Let somebody be heard. I had a beautiful interaction about 20 years ago with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, an incredible Anglican priest that with Nelson Mandela was part of that. He said the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he said the most important human need is to be heard.
What if somebody, I'm just imagining just different scenarios, somebody's watching us right now and is saying, hey, I know somebody who could use your help. He's, he or she, they're homeless. It's a homeless family or whatever. Can they reach out directly to Providence St Joseph Health?
The thing I would recommend, first of all, would be to reach to somebody who you love first. And if somebody is needing clinical help, use the suicide prevention hotline, use crisis text line, or reach out to a mental health provider in your own community. Providence St Joseph Health is present in many of the communities in the listening audience here, but there are other providers in other communities that are available. And so whether that's a healthcare provider, whether that's a community-based organization, it could be a school coach or a school nurse, it could be an HR professional in your organization, in the company that you work, it could be law enforcement that is increasingly desirous of actually helping people long before that turns into an issue where they'd need to use force or something else. So that I think what we're seeing in schools, in the workplace, in our faith settings is much more of an opening where many of us are really ready to be able to help and be there for each other.
Yeah, seems like it. And I know you mentioned you're in a lot of communities. I think, 50 hospitals, 830 clinics,
Right.
110,000 employees.
Yeah. So Providence St Joseph Health is the leading provider up and down the West Coast. Wellbeing Trust mission is actually national. So we're partnering with Providence St Joseph Health out in the West and with other care providers out across the country who are also committed to helping address these issues, both on the crisis end but also upstream.
Is there anything that we've missed that you would like to mention?
Well, for our foundation, I think speaking directly to people, speaking directly to you, is a reminder that we're not alone.
Right.
That if you're struggling with anxiety or depression, or you have thoughts of suicide, or you're continuing to reach for a substance and you know it is not working for you, that you're not alone and that help is actually available. And that there's a moment where we have a choice to sort of open up around that and tell the truth about our struggle and find a safe place to go, find someone to listen, or we close down and isolate. And when we close down and isolate, we get afraid, we contract.
Right.
It doesn't work very well. We need to be able to open up, and we'll find somebody that's there. Secondly, that we can do much in our schools, in our workplaces, in our community settings to be there for each other, to listen. As you said so beautifully a minute ago, sort of speak less, listen more to somebody that needs a trusting ear. And that if you care about these issues, you can create settings that make it more safe to talk about these issues at school or work, or get involved with us in local, state, or federal policy that make sure that the resources are in place, so that the dollars are there for funding, that the organizations are strong and well-funded that can provide the kind of crisis response as well as the prevention and early identification. And to remind ourselves that we are blessed to live in a democracy. Mm-hmm. And that in this period of political rancor, we sort of feel like our democracy has somehow been lost and is sort of out of our hands, but it's not. And here in Los Angeles and across the country, mayors and faith leaders and school and superintendents are leading the charge in every community in this country. Local leaders are reminding us that much works, and that this is a bipartisan and transpartisan issue. So if you want to get involved in your local community, roll up your sleeves and not only vote, but get engaged in some of the community campaigns that are working on the ground right now, because that is the hope of this country turning the tide, is local action. Showing up for each other and getting involved in your community.
You're very passionate, and the other people I've spoken to with Providence St Joseph Health are also passionate, so it just seems like it's a big, passionate organization going out there and trying to fix healthcare. Is that correct?
It's very true, and I think it becomes, from the beginning of the roots of the organization, 160 years ago, Catholic women coming to the United States to provide care to the poor and vulnerable, to reach out to those that were outside, that were excluded, that couldn't find support. And that 160-year-old mission inspires all of us every day to show up to work and to recognize, number one, that we're not alone and there's much we can do. So it's an honor to be working with Providence St Joseph Health, and the commitment Providence has made to Wellbeing Trust to be an independent organization that can bring other partners to join with us is one of the most profound leadership commitments that I've witnessed, and why I chose to take on this role over the last couple of years.
Well, I'm sure everyone is happy that you did. Tyler Norris, Chief Executive of Wellbeing Trust at Providence St Joseph Health. Thanks
Chris,
for coming.
a delight. Thanks for having me.
And thanks for joining us.